All right, I hope everybody has a seat. I'm going to go through the introduction really quick, and then we should be all set to get ready. So thanks for joining, guys. Welcome to our final Make Big Oil Pay event. Our final event of the season. We're so glad you're able to join us this evening. Tonight's presentation is designed to hopefully help Vermonters recognize some of the many costs of climate change that we are already paying. We also hope to make the case that Vermont taxpayers should not be the only ones footing the bill. This is a general introduction of our concept, and there will be opportunities to dig deeper into the legal and legislative policy aspects once a bill has been drafted. And I'm ready to go to the next slide. Awesome. As always, we'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement, recognizing the Indigenous peoples of Vermont, whose traditional territory we are gathering on this evening. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. To learn more or get involved, please visit the Vermont Indigenous Heritage Center at the Abenaki Arts and Education Center. And first of all, who are we? My name is Josh Ferguson. I'm the Climate and Energy Associate at VPIRG, and I am joined tonight by my colleague Jordan Hayden, who is our Climate Campaign Manager. And we're so happy to be with you guys tonight. As I mentioned earlier, tonight is the final stop on our 14-county statewide tour. We've been pretty busy these past several weeks, and here's a look at our complete lineup. Next, I'd like to quickly walk us through tonight's agenda. First, we're going to hear from the legislators who have joined us here tonight, and we will dive right into the problem we're currently facing in Vermont. After that, we'll head into our first breakout session, and after about 10 minutes, we'll regroup to discuss the solution that we're proposing tonight. Once we understand the bones of that solution, we'll go back into breakout groups to discuss that, and after another 10 minutes or so have passed, we'll come back together to take action tonight before we all head out. And as I just mentioned, we're going to be taking action in a few different ways tonight. The first is by completing our digital community action survey, which I believe my other colleague Danny will be linking in the chat in just a moment. We'll be compiling your responses along with the responses of all of our other tour attendees to share with legislators in January. We need all of your all's input, so please fill that out at some point this evening. Thank you so much. And I'd like to now take a moment to introduce the legislators joining us this evening. We are super lucky to have Representatives Esme Cole, Tesha Buss, Kathleen James, Carol Odie, and Senator Ann Watson, as well as Representative Robin Scheid. We're going to hear from each of them now about what they're hearing from constituents and seeing in their communities about climate change and what they hope to see happening during the legislative session this winter. So why don't we go in order of left to right, starting with Esme Cole. Representative, whenever you're ready. Thank you so much.
Hi all, it's so great to see you, and we keep getting more and more numbers here. It was so much fun hosting you in person too. I'm a representative in Hartford, Vermont, and we had a super fabulous event there. So thanks for coming down. And to the question of what am I hearing from constituents regarding climate change? I mean, it is like the time is now, basically. We cannot wait any longer. One piece that I am particularly excited about regarding this campaign is that it touches on what oftentimes we in the past have seen as untouchable, which are big corporations. And so I really am impressed by the strategy that your campaign is taking to, very strategically, propose a bill which would take back some of the, funds that would be required to pick up some of the damage, because we've got a lot of damage to pick up here. But yeah, lots of cool stuff happened this past legislative session, and maybe my colleagues can touch on some of that as well. But yeah, I'm just excited to continue to hear from all of you about what is most important. Thank you.
I'm not sure if Representative Buss is here, so we can just hop right on over to Representative James.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really glad to be here. I'll just touch on something that my colleague and buddy Rep. Cole didn't mention yet, so that we each talk about something different. I've spent a lot of this summer really closely following the work of the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, on the Affordable Heat Act, and just want to get that on everybody's radar. You can go to the PUC website and sign up to follow both proceedings as they're sort of grinding forward. One is the design of the actual draft rules that would stand up the clean heat standard itself and establish a marketplace. And the second is hiring a consultant to conduct the potential study, which is a really important study that will tell us quite a bit of things about the proposed clean heat standard, how much Vermonters stand to save from transitioning to clean heat measures, how much of an impact there might be on the price of fuel, workforce things, whether we have enough workforce to install the anticipated demand for heat pumps, and all kinds of stuff. So hope you guys are following along. Another thing just to put on your radar, which is that in 2025, of course, that's the first goal for us to meet our greenhouse gas pollution reduction requirements under the Global Warming Solutions Act. And the Agency of Natural Resources is actually charged with revising and updating its rules by June 2024 in order to make sure that we meet that 2025 deadline. So that's coming up pretty soon. It's something I had the opportunity to question Secretary Moore about at a recent energy forum here in Manchester, but the ANR has the ability and the charge to be updating its rules to make sure that we don't miss that first target in 2025. So want to make sure that climate activists around the state have that on their radar as well.
Thank you, Representative. I do not believe that Representative Odie is with us yet, so if we just want to go right along to Senator Watson.
Yeah, sure. Hello. So glad to be with you all. So I was also, similar to Representative Cole, also glad to be with you when you all came on this tour to Berry City. That was great. What I am hearing from constituents is just the massive impact that this is having on that climate change is having on people's businesses and on their lives. And for us, it is inextricably linked to the flood that happened, right? Like everybody recognizes that was as bad as it was, probably because of climate change. And I mean, we can say pretty clearly that it is costing us millions and millions of dollars in Washington County. And I mentioned this when you all were with us in person, but, just thinking about like the emotional cost that it is still taking on people here whose lives are still disrupted. It's everything from farms to like homes needing to be raised. Like there are just really significant problems that people are still dealing with. So anyways, all that is to say, I am hearing a lot from my constituents about the need for action. And just like Representative James was talking about the Affordable Heat Act, I want to also mention that something that climate activists may want to have on their radar is we're looking at reforming the renewable energy standard, which are rules around how we get our electricity. And my hope is that we can change the rules so that we end up requiring an increasingly decarbonized grid over the next few years. So I guess I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
We really appreciate that, Senator. And Representative Shai, if you'd like to add anything to that, please feel free.
Sure.
Take a moment.
Thanks. I didn't come exactly prepared for this, but Middlebury has and Addison County is heavily engaged in climate issues, as you probably know, with having Middlebury College and Bill McKibben here and 350. We also have an organization, a nonprofit called the Climate Economy Action Center. And they're doing amazing things. They're a nonprofit that got created out of something that we did years ago with the rural development. They're doing energy coaching to serve services to households. So lots of helping individuals make changes, whether it's heat pumps or electrifying things. They work with regional planning. We're trying to increase EV charging stations, working with farmers. The resilience has been really interesting when Senator Watson brought that up. In Irene, we were hit quite badly with the Middlebury River and people flooded out and all of that. And so we worked really hard to change what we did with the river and, create resilience. And it held when we had 6 inches of rain in 3 hours in August. That was our big rain thing. So I think people who were skeptical before are really starting to see that, in fact, this work we're doing is really important and it makes a difference in their lives. So that was sort of the good news. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what people have to say.
Thank you so much, Representative. I really appreciate that.
Mhm.
Patty, I do see your hand up, and we will definitely have time for questions and the like in just a few moments. But with all that, I'm going to hand it over to Jordan right now, and she's going to really dive into the problem of why we're all here tonight.
Thank you so much, Josh. I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen, and we'll get started in just a moment. All right. So again, thank you so much all for joining us this evening, and thank you, Josh, for teeing this conversation up, and to all of our legislators here with us. Again, my name is Jordan Hayden. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm VPIRG's Keep Vermont Cool campaign manager. And I'm going to kick us off with an overview of the way climate change has impacted us here in Vermont, and in particular, what it's costing each and every one of us. So let's begin with a rather uncomfortable truth. That is, for more than 50 years, big oil has been lying to us, and they've been covering up the fact that they've long known just how dangerous the fossil fuels are that they produce for our planet. And this is a headline from a recent front page Wall Street Journal article titled, "Inside Exxon's Strategy to Downplay Climate Change." Essentially, they knew that their products would cause this incalculable harm, but they lied about it. Their cover-up wasted the limited time we had to avoid disasters like the ones Vermonters have experienced this year. And in the meantime, their products have given kids and adults asthma. Big oil has delayed and delayed, while air pollution, primarily caused by fossil fuels, contributes to 1 in 5 deaths globally each year. Climate change means that tick season in Vermont is now a year-round nuisance, and Lyme disease cases only continue to rise. And blue-green algae continues to pollute our lakes as well. Climate change is stretching local government budgets in all sorts of ways. And in so many ways, this extreme weather is hitting Vermont particularly hard. But it's become so frequent that it almost feels like a new normal. So let's take a look at some of the examples of extreme weather that we've faced over the past year. 61 degrees. It was 61 degrees in Montpelier on New Year's Eve. Let that one sink in for a moment. Now, these are the record temperatures that were set in Montpelier since 2020, though this data goes all the way back 75 years to 1948. Now, every red square represents a new record high set in the last 3.5 years. Every blue square represents a new record low set in that same 42-month period. So, over the last 3.5 years, there have been 6 times as many record hot days as record cold days. And on October 4th, we added yet another hot record day to this graph. Now, these warming stripes show the annual temperature change in Vermont from 1895 to 2022. Red and blue stripes represent warmer and cooler temperatures, respectively. So clearly, all of that to say, we believe that winters are getting warmer. And in fact, no city in the continental United States has experienced more winter warming than Burlington, Vermont. It's now more than 7 degrees warmer on average in the winter than it was 50 years ago. And this last winter in particular was one of the warmest ever on record. That warm weather wreaked havoc on our ski areas. And it's also important to mention extremes. Just a few weeks after Vermont ski areas were closing due to heat, Mount Washington in New Hampshire reached the coldest wind chill ever recorded at 109 degrees below zero. But then again, 6 weeks later, we went right back into a very hot spring. Juxtaposed with a very cold snap in May that caused millions of dollars of damages to Vermont crops. Now, at the beginning of the summer, much of Vermont was experiencing a drought. And the state was blanketed in wildfire smoke blowing in from northern Ontario and western Canada. But then, as you all know, came the rain. Vermont received a month's worth of rain in just a few short hours, and the flooding was absolutely catastrophic. Major damage was recorded from south to north in places like Londonderry, Ludlow, Bridgewater, my home of Berry City, Montpelier, which was also home of one of VPIRG's offices, Richmond, and the Community Health Center in Johnson, just to name a few. So clearly, our local communities have suffered immensely and are still working to pick up the pieces in many cases. But with over 4,000 homes and 800 businesses damaged, it's going to take a while to do that. And not to mention, farmers all across the state are looking for additional support as well. So again, it's going to take years and hundreds of millions of dollars to recover from this recent flood. And those costs are only going to go up. UVM researchers have forecast that flooding alone will cost Vermonters $5.2 billion in the decades ahead. So we worked with an organization based in New York City this past summer called Rebuild by Design. And in their Atlas of Disaster, they found that Vermont has had the 7th highest number of federally declared disasters in the country over the last decade. And we've also had the 5th highest per capita spending on climate disasters since 2011. So that leads us to our first discussion question, which is, what is climate change costing you? This picture is from our campaign office in Montpelier, again, after the floods in July, but we're really eager to hear your stories. So we'll be transitioning now into 3 separate breakout rooms to answer this question. We'll spend about 10 minutes or so chatting, and then we'll regroup and get back into the presentation. So for now, just stand by as we get those rooms ready. So again, thank you all for your participation in that conversation. I know these topics can get a little bit heavy, so we really do appreciate your comments. And this feedback is especially critical because we're compiling all of the information that we've received at every tour event, and we will be sharing that with local legislators this coming January. So again, thank you so much. Now, as we mentioned at the start, Big Oil knew for decades that their products would eventually cause the kind of chaos that we are experiencing here and now today. But they lied about it and funded this massive decades-long disinformation campaign, really designed to confuse the press, the public, and the policymakers about the dangers of fossil fuels. Obviously, that's not right, and this campaign really aims to address that. So the Make Big Oil Pay campaign is rooted in a value that most of us learned in kindergarten. That is, if you make a mess, you help clean it up. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening. And you might be asking yourself, well, what price has Big Oil paid for the mess that their products have caused our climate? And the answer to that is 0. No price. They have paid absolutely nothing. Instead, Big Oil has made record profits, obscene amounts of money. $200 billion in profits last year alone. They are getting rich while Vermonters are left paying the bill. All of that to say, we do have a lot of hope, and we're seeing progress happening throughout the state. Our polling shows that more and more Vermonters are alarmed and concerned about climate and are willing to take action to address it. And this poll that's up on the screen was conducted before the summer. So we believe that these numbers are probably even higher today because we're seeing a lot of that forward-moving momentum. We also see that climate action is becoming a part of Vermont's popular culture. And there are more climate champions in the State House than ever before. So thank you for that, legislators. The Vermont Attorney General is suing Big Oil for violating Vermont's consumer protection laws. And as State Treasurer Mike Pichak says, it only seems fair to ask those who most significantly contributed to the problem to help foot the bill. And we agree. And there's actually a plan to hold Big Oil accountable. Now, the idea of a climate superfund at the federal level was proposed by Bernie Sanders in 2021. It also had support from Peter Welch. But now that anti-climate legislators controlled the US House, the prospects for meaningful federal legislation are essentially no. But that's okay, because we also have a plan to hold these polluters accountable. Now, we believe it's time for Vermont state legislators to act. To be clear, we believe that federal action is sort of a dead end for the time being, so we're going to cross those options out for now. And the fossil fuel industry has successfully delayed action by the court system, so that remains a bit of a question mark. So that's why it's time for state-level legislation. Now, Maryland, Massachusetts, and New York already have bills introduced to establish climate superfunds in their states. So we think it's Vermont's turn now. New York's bill is the furthest along, so we'll be using that one as an example. Their bill, which is sponsored by the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, has already passed the state Senate and will be taken up by the state Assembly in January. Now, just to be clear, I am not an attorney, but luckily there is a lot more information available on our website, makebigoilpay.org, if you want more of those deeper policy specifics. But for right now, we're going to explore some of the basics that are shared among the Maryland, Massachusetts, and New York bills, and what we would expect to see in a Vermont bill that could be introduced as early as January. So first, it's important to know that the proposal is based on two existing laws. The Environmental Protection Agency Superfund program, which was established by Congress in 1980 and has cleared up over 1,000 toxic waste sites across the country, including about a dozen in Vermont, and the Vermont Waste Management Act, which was established in the 80s and has been updated several times since. All of that to say, there is precedent for state legislators to act. Second, like the EPA Superfund and the Waste Management Act, the Vermont Climate Superfund would operate under a strict liability standard. So in these cases, state agencies do not need to prove wrongdoing, such as negligence, in order to compel a cleanup or recover government response costs. And then third, like the EPA Superfund, the Vermont Climate Superfund would be established by the legislature, but managed by an executive branch agency. So in this case, that would be the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, or ANR. So we're not asking Vermont legislators to figure out all of those finer and final details, simply to introduce the parameters and let the regulators do the rest. So to move on and to move forward in 2024, we believe that the legislature should focus on three key elements of the program. First, legislators will need to define the class of responsible parties. In other words, the companies that will receive a bill from the state. For this work, we suggest that they use the carbon majors research conducted by the Climate Accountability Institute. Now, they've already identified the 100 oil, gas, and coal companies that are responsible for 71% of global emissions. And again, you can find a link to that research on our website, makebigoilpay.org. And it's also important to note that these are all major international polluters. So we're not proposing that the local mom and pop heating fuel dealer is on this list. Those are not the folks that we're targeting. So of the top 100 global polluters, VPIRG's research has identified 9 with business footprints inside the state of Vermont. It is these companies that we believe can and should be held accountable. Second, we need to add up all the ways that climate change is costing Vermonters, as well as determine how much we'll charge the class of responsible parties, and of course the portion of their bills based on their own global emissions. Now, a few years ago, the state did a similar accounting exercise about the costs to clean up Lake Champlain. So again, all of that to say, there is existing expertise there. And in our first breakout, we discussed the many ways that climate change is costing Vermonters. And again, we will compile that information and share with legislators and regulators when they return to the State House in January. Now, an initial estimate for expenses over the next 25 years is at least $5 billion, but some models would peg it even closer to $25 billion. And that's what Vermonters will have to spend over and above a business as usual scenario. So, if we require the fossil fuel industry to cover 50% of those damages, then we would expect to see $100 million per year from those fossil fuel giants for the next 25 years, which is a total of $2.5 billion. However, the legislature and the Agency of Natural Resources could very well find that the costs are even higher than that. So third, we need to identify what would be eligible appropriations for a Vermont Climate Superfund. AKA, how do we spend that money? Now, we know that New York will use these funds to provide support for infrastructure repairs, disaster relief, preventative healthcare, weatherization, air conditioning, and water cleanup. And at least 40% of those funds will be designated for climate change infrastructure projects that will benefit disadvantaged communities, something that Vermont should absolutely be thinking about. And we can do that by referencing the Vermont Environmental Disparity Index, which collects data based on exposure to environmental hazards and various population characteristics. So the darker the color on the map, the more combined environmental, social, and health burdens that particular community carries. And in this case, environmental burdens include air pollution, hazardous sites, landfills, lead in school drinking water, heat vulnerability, and flood hazards, to just name a few. So again, this tool would be incredibly helpful in determining where and how to allocate some of those potential climate superfund dollars. Which brings us to our second breakout. How would you use a climate superfund here in Vermont? So let's regroup now and discuss the ways that we would like for that money to be spent. We'll spend another 10 minutes or so, and then Josh will continue on the conversation. So stand by, and we'll get you in your breakout rooms again soon.
Thank you guys for sharing everything. I know I felt really grateful that my group felt comfortable sharing those thoughts with me. So I appreciate you guys doing that as well. Moving on to the action side of the event tonight, in true grassroots order, we believe that one of the best ways to participate in democracy is to let your legislators know how their constituents feel on important topics. So if you all would take the next few minutes to write an e-postcard, as I'm calling it now, I believe my colleague Danny will drop a link to that in the chat. There it is. We would greatly appreciate your efforts. I'm going to give you guys the next 5 minutes or so. If you want to turn on some nice music, take your feet up and just start typing away, and I'll bring us back together at about 7 o'clock. There are several other ways you can take action tonight or on your own time. But for tonight, Danny is going to be dropping a link that will allow you to share your climate story on our Keep Vermont Cool page. And my colleague Jordan may even decide to showcase your story. But they're all important. But also feel free to visit us online at makebigoilpay.org. You can find all of our resources, get in touch with us, various other activities. Also, feel free to post on social media using the hashtag #MakeBigOilPay. And also keep an eye on your email or wherever you get your information about our upcoming events. For we are planning on hosting an event at the State House once the legislative session starts to really announce that we intend to hold Big Oil accountable. And once again, thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. It was a joy to host for you guys. Please make note of all of our sponsors and co-sponsors for this tour. And once again, check out makebigoilpay.org. And of course, if you have any questions or want a copy of the slide deck, feel free to reach out to Jordan or myself, and we will get back to you with answers to all of your questions.